Story time with Stephany Storey.
Hi, and welcome to Story Time. I am art historical novelist Stephany Storey, and I am very much looking forward to my conversation today because I am the biggest believer in revisions. I love them. When I teach a class, I'm constantly telling my students that, writing is rewriting, and the first draft of everything is according to, Ernest Hemingway. So, this is my thing. So I cannot wait to hear what my guest has to say today. She is a 25-year veteran of the publishing industry, working for everything from the giant, big, well-known, big 5, 6, whatever they've been through the years, publishing houses, as well as with newer authors with her own company. And her newest book, called Intuitive Editing, A Creative and Practical Guide to Revising Your Writing, just came out on April 30th. Welcome to the show, Tiffany Yates Martin.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so after my rant, literally, I so believe in revising. From my first draft until the thing you read that's published, I don't think there's a sentence that's the same.
Wow.
I really don't. I think
Are you a plotter outer, or did you sort of follow the thread as the story develops?
The pantser people, or whatever they call themselves, the people who, for those of you home who don't know what a plotter versus a pantser is, a plotter is a person who details every single thing before they set to writing. And a pantser is somebody who, I don't understand it, sits down and starts typing. I'm a historical novelist, so everything I do is based on enormous amounts of research. I would not be able to sit down and just start typing. So I have to put together timelines. Why is revising so important to you that you wrote a whole book about it?
I started doing this, I used to be an actor, and I started doing this as my side hustle. I was living in New York, and this is the silliest story. I was dead broke. And I found in the New York Times a classified ad that said, "Get paid for reading books, send us $25 and we'll tell you how." This was in 1992, and I was literally a starving artist. And I thought, I did not have $25 to spare, but I was a waiter, like many actors are, and I was hoping that I wouldn't be a waiter forever. And I had majored in English, and I thought, maybe. So I got the book and I started copy editing. And then after just a few years, I realized this was actually my calling, which I must have known because I majored in English literature. And ever since then, it's just been like, I don't know, I'm very passionate about this. I'm passionate about the way that story takes on a life of its own. Like, there's the idea that you have while you're writing it. And then it's almost as if you mine out so much more depth to me and richness. And you really find what story you intended to tell in the process of doing the revisions. Is that your experience as a writer?
Yeah, I don't, even though I've plotted it out all beforehand because it's all history, I don't think you can't find out what you have to say until you've written it. And then you can't actually hone what you've said until you're revising it.
Well, and not just what you say. I feel like you have to get to know these characters, you have to get to know the world, and you have to kind of live, if this sounds creepy, in their skin. You know what I mean? You have to travel this journey with them.
Does not sound creepy to me at all. I'm also a trained actor. That's part of what we do with novelists, is we put on other people, right?
Yeah, it's method writing.
What did the craft of acting give you as a person who works on stories and books and writing craft?
That's a good question. The first thing it did was made me get really good at rejection. Like, no rejection scares you after you can be literally in the middle of a scene and have somebody go, "Thank you," and dismiss. After that, someone rejecting you via email is lovely. I think it's all story. I was thinking about that recently, that I think finding the heart of your character that you're playing as an actor is no different, really, from fleshing out the character that you're writing. In both cases, you really have to, again, this sounds creepy, get all up inside them and figure out who they are.
So what are some of the practical tips you give to writers who are at home struggling with this process, second guessing themselves, not even knowing where to start? So many of my students do not know where to start with a revision.
I love that you said that you said practical, because that was really my main aim. And that is why I put it in the subtitle, because it is here's my theory about editing. I get a little chesty about approaches that say, this is the right way to do it. Make your story fit this structure, or, impose this structure on your story. I don't think that's how story develops. I think it's art, right? It's as individual as somebody's fingerprint. And so I think for me, the process is much more about get all up inside, keep saying that, what the story is and what your vision is, and then grow it from there. So I do take a really practical approach. And the thing I centered the book around and the way I work with authors is around questions. You've probably noticed that if you've gotten any far into the book. I think that's one way to, for one thing, evaluate objectively, to look at your book and start asking yourself questions, but also to ask them in a really practical, specific way. Like I do talk about goal and motivation and conflict and everything that is classic story structure, but to me in a way that's practical. Like, how does that look in a character's life? One of the questions I encourage authors to ask themselves, for instance, is who is your character in the world? I remember when I was just starting out in this, and I love reading craft books. There's a whole shelf of them back there. And I would read things like, you should know your character's favorite color. You should know their hobbies. And I get why that is advised in craft books, but it also is kind of esoteric advice, right? Like, okay, same with acting, like create your character. You should absolutely understand who their favorite teacher was. Great, but what do I do with that when I know it? And so the approach I tried to take was, how do you figure out who your character is relevant to the journey that you're taking them on and make them feel real, like you'd get to know a person, really? Like when you would sit down with somebody that you're just meeting, and that's not how you'd find out who they are. You'd kind of get to know who they are as a human being. That's a really esoteric answer. I feel like
No, it's not. It's not at all. It absolutely makes sense. What it's making me think is I'm a craft book junkie too. I love them. But so many of them I feel like, well, this book is really built for this other person, and it's not built for me. This book doesn't work at all. Mm-hmm. And what I like about the sound of this approach, and from what I've looked at, is it does try to give an answer to every writer, no matter what kind of writer you are, give you some questions and some answers to play with so that you can try to apply them to your own writing, which is a really interesting way to look at taking a book that can be sort of broad and applying it specifically to somebody's work, right?
Yeah, I wanted to get as close as I could. That's how I work with authors. I don't want to say pick apart, because it's not destructive at all. We get down in the trenches and we figure out what the story is, who the characters are, what their intent, what the author's intention was, what their vision is. How can we make that more effective on the page? I wanted to approximate that as closely as you can generally in writing a book like this, but as specifically as I do with writers with these questions.
But it's really hard for a lot of art. I mean, I came up in the Hollywood world, so I was used to a really collaborative, cutthroat industry. I didn't really have a problem with someone giving me notes. It was like, great, tells me what I can cut, not a problem. But I know so many writers who really struggle with taking criticism or feedback and applying it constructively. Like, so often I see students of mine, they get a piece of feedback and they take it wholesale and just apply it. I'm like, no. It might not be really good advice.
Yeah.
How do you help people learn to take feedback and constructive criticism and use it well, not get beaten down by it, and actually apply it to their writing in a helpful way?
That is also a good question. I think that's sort of a multi-pronged answer. A lot of it is in the approach, the editor's approach. And I've heard stories from authors about, you use the word constructive. I think that's a fantastic word for this. I always say that an editor's feedback should be positive and constructive. And by that, I don't mean blowing smoke. You still want to have a clear eye and be able to say, here's what I'm seeing. But that's the focus. It's not, here's what you did right or wrong, because it's your story. And frankly, this whole business is subjective, just like Hollywood is, just like any artistic business is. So how do I know what your story, what the right answer is? I'm bringing years of experience and years of market knowledge, but it's still your story and it's still your vision. So the question is less trying to figure out what's right and what matches your vision. So I try to frame all the questions that way. Instead of saying, she wouldn't do this, I might say, well, earlier you showed that she had an alcoholic father, and so one of her vulnerabilities is feeling helpless. But here you have her doing something that completely counters that, and I'm not sure we've seen why. You might support it. Why does she? I don't offer suggestions so much as I ask the questions. Why does she do that here? Because a lot of times I think the author knows, but it's not on the page. And that's basically my job as an editor, is hold up the mirror and show you how much of what you think you're conveying actually is on the page for the reader to pick up.
You've been doing this a long time. Why a book now? Why did you feel like you had to put this particular object yourself, this book, out into the world right now?
A couple of reasons. I have wanted to do this for more years than I can tell you, but I don't know that I felt ready. I think I needed to amass experience and knowledge. I've been an editor since 1992, but I've been a developmental editor for, I think, about 12 years. And that sounds like a long time, and it is, but I don't know. I just needed to feel confident that you and I talked about how much we love craft books, and there's a lot of them out there. And if I was going to do one, it needed to be something that was fresh and useful and different, that would offer authors something that they weren't already getting somewhere else. And so what kind of made the book happen was that often when I am writing an editorial letter or writing a comment, and I wanted to say, I'll say something like, we need to understand a little bit more about what makes what happened in this character's past that created that unique vulnerability that has kicked off her present situation. And I had this whole thing I wanted to explain about what that is that's way beyond the scope of an edit. So I would say, try this book or this book, and there's a bunch that I absolutely love, but none of it was exactly what I wanted to convey. And I thought, you know what, why don't I just write that thing? I don't know, I do think it's a big, mysterious, wonderful craft that we're all in, but I also think that there's some really practical, not easy, but simple ways you can break it down to bring your story to life. And I kind of wanted to cut through some of the MFA type approach and say, look, this is what story is. Here's how you can create that. We're all human. We understand this stuff.
I love that. I got my MFA, and it was one of the, not to disparage MFAs really, except it was really difficult to get over.
Except for that, don't disparage it.
Except for the fact that it was nearly impossible as a writer to get over the 2 years I spent in an MFA. It's great. So
because of the criticism, because of my impression of it, and I don't have an MFA, is that it seems almost like boot camp, where it's like break the writer down.
Yeah.
And that to me doesn't feel productive.
It's super, super critical. It's highly critical. That's the other reason why you could tell me to cut anything out of my writing, and I would go, great, sounds good, because of MFA.
Because you're just one big scar tissue.
That's right. But there were also all of these, speaking about where you said, which I loved, that it's not really about the criticism of, well, the person wouldn't have done that. It's about helping someone to hone their own story. In an MFA program, there are these specific boxes that other writers are trying to get you to work into, instead of finding your own story necessarily. There are all these expectations of what a book is supposed to be, instead of the unique story.
What makes it art? What makes it literary?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are all of those constructs that come in. So how do you talk to writers who are either trying to write into a specific genre, right? So they feel like they have all these rules placed on them, or they're trying to be literary, or whatever they're trying to be. How do you deal with balancing the rules that you sort of have to meet, I guess, in order to be published and meet the market, versus helping writers find their own story in their own way?
I'm probably not going to give the right answer to this, because I really, it's funny, I say in the book, early in that anytime I use the word rules, it will be in quotes. And by God, it is, because I'm not a big fan for writing. I think this is creativity. I don't think you can stick rules on creativity. Now, that said, I understand that certain genres have expectations. So sometimes I'll work on a story that I work in a lot of women's fiction, for example. And sometimes I'll work on a story that's not really deeply exploring a character arc as much as is expected in the genre. And so we dig deeper there. But like I know, for example, romance has really prescribed rules, and I have trouble with that. Because to me it does feel like a box, and I really want to me this is how a story grows, not like this. And so that may be why I don't work in romance as much. But even that, like the expectations, I don't think of them as rules. I don't think of them as tropes so much as just know your audience. And so if you are writing for a romance audience, if you are writing for women's fiction, if you're writing historical, know what those readers read to get out of the story and find a way to deliver that is still true to the story you want to deliver. I take as individual and unique an approach to storytelling as is possible in a generic book, because I think that's what story is. I think that's what art is. I think that's what an artist is.
I love that so much, honestly, because I do, and I feel like I hear so many. A writer friend the other day emailed me and go, well, I had to throw out the story I was writing on because my agent told me it wasn't part of my brand. And I was like, oh,
ow,
do that.
Yeah. I mean, I get that because an agent is dealing with marketability issues. So I do get that. But that's one thing I really like about the democratization of publishing with self-publishing is that you can have authors who are hybrid, maybe. You know, if this is off brand for you, but that's a story you want to write, isn't that why we write? Isn't that why we are artists, so that we can stretch ourselves and explore things and do whatever is calling to us at that moment? And there are market realities if you want to make a living at it, but isn't it nice that you've got options to be able to get those stories out?
I hope so, because it sure takes a long time to write a novel. So I would hope you'd really love it, because
Oh
it
my
takes
God,
a
I
lot
know.
of bleeding.
Yeah, and I don't like the idea of like writing to your market, just because I feel like it leaches some of that artistic uniqueness and joy and life out of it. But you know, what do I know? I work within the publishing industry, so clearly I am constricted by market realities.
This is what I was about to say. However, all of this lovely art stuff being said, which is great, which I am 1000% on board with. You have worked in the publishing industry for 25 years.
Yeah.
There are market constraints and branding constraints. There are all of these big traditional constraints. So one, can you talk to listeners about the reality of some of those constraints, how you've seen them change through your 25 years in the traditional market, and then I'll ask you about self-publishing.
So every publishing professional will tell you things like, yes, we want, not publishing professional, like you will hear as a writer all the time, here's what's selling, here's what you should be writing. And I think every publisher and agent is waiting for the thing that shatters all those norms and makes you go, wow, this is new and different. I mean, it's why something like, I'm trying to think of good examples, like Gone Girl was one that it just kind of took all the conventions and went, bam, in your face. It's the ones that change the paradigm almost that are the smash hits. So I do think there's value in writing for what you know is going to fit the market, but I also think everybody's hoping for that thing that is utterly original and utterly different. So I don't know. I mean, this is where I come into like conflict a little bit with the realities of the market. The art's first for me. And so I really feel like, yes, want to be a published author and be cognizant of what the market is. But also, if you do what you're doing well, you're going to get published. You're going to get attention for it. So I don't know. I just feel like free yourself and trust that if you're telling a great story, that's what matters. Story is the heart of everything.
Okay, and now I have to ask a little bit about self-publishing, because there's going to be so many people who read your book who are going to go out into the self-publishing world, and there are all kinds of business challenges with that I won't ask you about. But as far as making sure that if you are going to go the self-published route for whatever reason, how do you get your writers to make sure that they are putting something out of high enough quality that they should be putting it out? Because that's always my fear. I'm like, but you need to wait. You can self-publish. That's great if you want to, but please wait until it's good enough to put out.
Yeah, and realize you are competing with everything published by a traditional publisher that will have all those resources.
Yes. So how do you encourage people, or how do you tell people, how far do they go? When do they stop? How do they know when they're done? Those are the questions that I'm asked so often by students.
So by the time someone hires a developmental editor, you know, it's not cheap, and you are making a serious investment. So I feel like at that point, they are aware of the fact that you have to make this the best product you can. And I also think it depends on what your goals are. If you want to self-publish because you want to be published and it means something to you to see your book, and you're not trying to be J.K. Rowling, and you're not hoping to get the attention of the industry and be the media darling, then more power to you. Write your story, publish your story. But if you are trying to be competitive, then bring the same resources to bear on your own work that the big five and other houses are offering to their authors. So that means a professional edit. It means a professional copy edit. It means a professional cover artist, not, and apologies to Fiverr, not somebody you picked up on Fiverr. There are industry professionals out there. For example, I self-published this book, and I really thought long and hard about that. But it was important to me to keep this control over this book for a lot of reasons. It's incredibly close to my heart, and I have plans for it. I wanted to be able to control everything in it. But I hired the former art director from Hachette to design it. And I made sure I got industry professionals who could make it look and feel and read like anything you would pick up from the big five, because I need to be competitive with them. But you're right, it's a subjective thing. And how do you know? I mean, hopefully by hiring a developmental editor. It's a great question, because I mean, there's the gatekeeper question, right? Like, when you are chosen, it's because the gatekeeper let you through. It's because you're there. How do you know that without it? I don't think I have a good answer for that. It is really subjective. If you work with an industry professional and they tell you, yeah, this is ready, and I have said to authors, I don't think it's there yet, but I usually say it in conjunction with submitting. Like if they want to be submitting to agents, or they are hoping that they're going to be able to shop it to publishers through their agent, I will honestly but constructively say, I'm not sure it's all the way there yet. Here's why I think so. Here's what you could work on. But I don't know if I would say that to somebody who was self-publishing unless they said to me that their goal was to compete with that, because there's a lot of different reasons people self-publish. I think you have to know what those are.
So it's very difficult for me to ask this last question, because the times we are in are so unique and extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Your book came out at the end of April. Okay, mine came out early April, my second one. So I understand this is a dreadful time to publish a book. But how has the process of putting this book out so far been for you? How has the pandemic affected it, or how has it just been? Just in general, how has it been to put this book out for you?
So I panicked a little, like everybody, when all this started to happen, and I knew my book was coming out. Then I just thought, oh boy. And I also worried that I think my fear was that the first thing that was going to go was going to be people's, like, I guess, artistic pursuit, because we're kind of all reduced to that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're all suddenly on the bottom level. But it's been interesting that it's been just the opposite. I think everybody is now supercharged, whether you have like the creative spark burning right now or not, because I know this is very decimating to that. just because of worries and logistics and all the new responsibilities a lot of people have. But I do think it's become more important than ever. One thing I thought was really interesting was that when this happened, the first thing that suddenly started skyrocketing as far as people's interests was watching things, reading things, people working on their art. And as time has gone by, I've seen that more and more creative people are leaning into that, because what do we reach for in hard times? Story. So I keep saying that because I think story is the basis of everything. It's how we understand the world. It's how we understand each other. It's how we learn. It's how we make sense of things. It's how we comfort ourselves. And when has any of that ever been more important than right now? So that's a big, long way of saying, weirdly, like this has almost been helpful. I feel horrible saying that, but I feel like a lot of people are home. And if you can't write right now, that is a great place to come at the objective distance you need to edit.
Well, no, I mean, I started to say, I understand like the cringe, it's been helpful, but I think of it more as, isn't it weirdly cosmic that it ended up being a gift for the writers who were stuck at home in their house with time and going, but I don't know how to do this, but I have this time to do this. So it's sort of, I think it's sort of lovely that it came out now, not because the pandemic helped the book, because the book helps the pandemic and people.
Maybe. Do you know that Chinese proverb, good news, bad news, who can say?
Yeah.
That's sort of been my guiding tenet during all of this. Like, who knows when this happened, when all of this has happened, every step of it, I'm just like, at first I thought maybe this will bring us together, as human beings, and maybe it's just like good news, bad news, who can say? And that was sort of the thing with the book. At first I thought it was going to be really bad, but then like you said, I've had so many people say to me, this is exactly what I needed right now.
Right. And that's a beautiful thing. So do you think there are people sitting at home? I think there are people sitting at home struggling with being creative and figuring out how to tackle projects, because, there's a global pandemic happening outside the door. I don't know if you know that. It's very distracting.
Well, and it's funny you say distracting, because there is this weird part of me that thought one of the things I talk about in the book is that when you approach and edit, what makes it hard to edit yourself is that as an editor, I am objective about your work. As the author, you're not. It's that filling in the blank thing we talked about. So if you are distracted right now, that's kind of a perfect way to get distance from where you are with your story and see it through fresh eyes. It's kind of like enforced pandemic objectivity. And it gives you a different perspective, because you are wrestling with these suddenly huge life issues. And now you can come to your story and see it as a separate entity rather than this thing you've been swimming around in for so long.
Yeah, it's definitely changed even though I write about history, it's changed my perspective on so much. It's ridiculous. Okay. I could talk to you for the next 8 hours. So but I'm going to let you go because I've kept you long enough. This is fantastic. I love everything you've said. I love the fact that you put the art first over the branding and the marketing and all the stuff that I'm aware is part of the business. But I think more people need to hear to put their art and their gut first on finding their story. So I love the title, the intuitiveness. I love the practicality of it. I love it all. Thank you for
Thanks.
what you do.
Thanks for having me on.
No, this was lovely. I'll do it again anytime.
With Stephanie story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie.